The millionaire CEO had no idea he had a daughter, until the little girl called him Daddy in the hotel lobby. Alexander Grayson had never been a man easily shaken. For most of his life, he had existed in a world that bowed to his precision, his discipline, and his control. He ran companies like an orchestra conductor, every decision deliberate, every move calculated. But that night, inside the quiet lobby of the Grand Aurora Hotel, control slipped through his fingers the moment he heard a sound he hadn't expected to ever react to, a child's cry. It came from somewhere near the far corner, soft and uneven, like a broken melody fighting to be heard. His first instinct was to walk away. Crying children weren't his concern, they belonged to the ordinary chaos of lives unlike his. Yet something about the sound pierced him in a way he couldn't explain. Against his own logic, his steps slowed, then turned, carrying him toward it. Near a decorative plant, half hidden from the flow of guests, sat a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 3. Her small hands rubbed at her tear-stained cheeks, and her brown curls framed a face so heartbreakingly innocent it stopped him cold. He wasn't used to moments like this, moments that felt human, fragile. Kneeling down felt foreign, unnatural even, yet he found himself doing it. "Hey there," he said, his voice soft, uncertain. "What's wrong?" She looked up, and the sight of her eyes, those large, clear blue eyes, sent an involuntary tremor through his chest. He didn't understand why. She hiccuped through her sobs. "My mommy, she went away. I can't find her." For a second, he forgot where he was. The crowded lobby, the businessmen with their briefcases, the distant hum of conversations, all of it faded into silence. There was only her, this tiny stranger with trembling lips and a loneliness too big for her small body. He reached into his pocket, found his handkerchief, and offered it. "Don't cry, sweetheart," he murmured, and his voice, usually sharp as steel, came out barely above a whisper. "We'll find her, okay?" The girl hesitated, then nodded, clutching his handkerchief like it was a lifeline. Without thinking, he extended his hand. Her fingers were so small when they wrapped around his. For reasons he couldn't begin to name, he didn't let go. They walked toward the reception desk together, the towering man in a suit worth more than most cars, and the tiny girl with pink shoes and a tear-streaked face. Guests glanced curiously, but Alexander barely noticed. Something inside him had shifted, and it unsettled him more than any corporate deal ever could. As he leaned toward the receptionist to ask about lost children, the hotel doors opened, and a voice cut through the air, a woman's voice, breathless and trembling. "Lily." He turned sharply. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Standing just inside the doorway was a woman he had spent years trying to forget. Her blonde hair gleamed under the lobby lights, her blue eyes wide with panic, and then disbelief as they landed on him. "Emma," he said quietly, almost to himself. Her lips parted, the color draining from her face. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice caught somewhere between shock and fear. For a moment, neither of them moved. Time felt suspended, trapped between the past they shared and the unbearable present. Then Lily turned, squealing "Mommy," and ran into Emma's arms. Alexander's throat tightened as he watched Emma kneel, clutching the girl to her chest, murmuring something against her hair. The warmth of the reunion should have eased him, but instead it made something in him ache. When Emma finally looked back at him, her expression was unreadable, pain, anger, and exhaustion woven together. He took a slow step forward. "Emma," he said again, his voice low, unsteady. "She's yours?" She hesitated. Then she looked at Lily, who was now resting her head against her shoulder, and said quietly, "Yes." He swallowed hard, his gaze drawn to the little girl's curls, to her eyes, the same impossible blue as his own reflection in the mirror. "Emma," he started, his voice breaking. "Is she?" He couldn't finish. But Emma understood. Her jaw tightened, and her answer came like a blade cloaked in calm. "You don't get to ask that, Alexander. You made your choice a long time ago." His mind flashed back to that day years ago, the argument in his office, the way she had looked at him when he accused her of manipulation. He remembered the coldness in his own tone, the way he dismissed her pain as weakness. And now here she was, holding a child who might be his, standing before him like the embodiment of everything he'd lost. He opened his mouth, but the words never came. She turned to leave, her heels echoing against the marble floor, and as he watched her go, Lily's head resting on her shoulder, he felt the first true regret of his life settle like a weight he couldn't lift. He stood there long after they had disappeared from sight, the echo of the child's sobs still lingering in his ears, the image of Emma burned into his mind. For the first time in years, Alexander Grayson didn't feel powerful, or wealthy, or in control. He felt human. And it terrified him. The night after seeing Emma again, Alexander didn't sleep. He sat in the dark of his penthouse, the city skyline glowing faintly through the glass walls, untouched whiskey sweating in his hand. The image of her face, shocked, guarded, then heartbreakingly calm, wouldn't leave his mind. For years he had convinced himself that what they'd shared had been a mistake, something fleeting, an emotional lapse in judgment during a chaotic period in his life. But that belief was starting to crumble under the weight of her eyes and the little girl who had looked up at him with the same blue gaze he saw in the mirror every morning. He couldn't stop thinking about her voice, small but certain, when she'd said, "Mommy, he's nice." It replayed in his head until it became unbearable. Somewhere beneath the layers of success, beneath the armor he'd built from power and wealth, there was still the man who had once loved Emma Hayes more than he'd ever admitted. The next morning, his assistant entered his office and froze. He wasn't the man she usually saw, polished, focused, emotionally impenetrable. His tie was undone, his hair slightly disheveled, and there was a tension in his eyes she couldn't define. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," he said without looking up. "Everything?" she asked, surprised. "Everything." His tone left no room for argument. Once she left, he sat back and stared out the window, the city sprawling below him. He thought about the night 4 years ago when he'd driven Emma away. He remembered her standing in his office, tears in her eyes, her voice trembling as she told him she was pregnant. He'd felt something crack inside him then, something raw and unfamiliar, and instead of facing it, he'd buried it under anger. "You think this will make me stay?" he had said, pacing like a man trapped. "You think you can tie me to you with a child?" Her face had fallen, and even now he could still see the disbelief in her expression when she whispered, "You really think I'd do that?" He hadn't answered. He'd simply turned away, letting silence do the damage words couldn't. It was easier back then to believe she was lying. Easier to tell himself that she wanted his money, his name, his protection. He'd built his empire by trusting no one, and when the one person he thought he could trust had come to him with something that could ruin everything, he'd chosen self-preservation over love. It had been the biggest mistake of his life, though he hadn't realized it until now. The next few days passed in a haze. He tried to bury himself in work, but every contract, every phone call, every board meeting blurred together. He saw only her. He found himself checking hotel records, asking the concierge discreetly if they had any information about the woman who had been in the lobby that evening. The man hesitated, reluctant to break policy, but Alexander's tone carried quiet authority. "Her name is Emma Hayes," he said finally. "I just want to make sure she and her daughter are safe." The concierge hesitated, then nodded slightly. "They checked out this morning, sir." A small address listed, a residential area outside the city. Alexander's heart pounded as he read the address scribbled on a notepad. He knew that area. Modest houses, quiet streets, nothing like the world he inhabited. He folded the paper, placed it in his wallet, and told himself he wouldn't go. He knew crossing that line could change everything. But by that evening, he was in his car, driving. When he arrived, the neighborhood was calm, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Children played in front yards, and somewhere, music floated faintly from an open window. He parked down the street and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Through the windshield, he saw her, Emma, standing by a small white house with a garden full of overgrown roses. She wore jeans and a soft blue blouse, her hair tied up, strands of gold catching the light. And beside her was Lily, running in circles, laughing, her curls bouncing with every step. The sound of her laughter hit him harder than any business failure ever could. He'd missed this. He'd missed her first words, her first steps, every single moment that should have been his. When Emma noticed him, the laughter stopped. She froze, her eyes widening in disbelief as he stepped out of the car. "Alexander," she said, her voice low but sharp. "What are you doing here?" He took a step closer, unsure how to begin. "I needed to see you," he said simply. Her jaw tightened. "Why?" "So you can ease your conscience. You've seen us now, congratulations. You can go." Her words cut cleanly, but he didn't flinch. "I deserve that," he said quietly. "But you deserve the truth, too." She shook her head, half laughing bitterly. "The truth? You didn't want to hear it 4 years ago." He looked down for a moment, his voice barely audible. "I wasn't the man I should have been then." Silence stretched between them. Lily ran toward her mother and hid behind her leg, peeking at him with cautious curiosity. Alexander's gaze softened. "She's beautiful," he said. "She looks just like you." Emma's eyes flickered, pain and anger blending together. "No," she said. "She looks like you." Her words hit him like a blow. He wanted to speak, to ask the question burning inside him, but fear held him back. He could see how fiercely Emma protected the child, how much she'd had to become to survive on her own. She wasn't the same woman he'd broken. She was stronger now, and part of him admired that as much as it terrified him. He took a small step forward, lowering his voice. "Let me be a part of her life," he said. "Please." Emma stared at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Finally, she whispered, "You don't get to walk in and fix what you destroyed." She turned, took Lily's hand, and walked toward the house. He didn't follow. He stood there on the sidewalk, the weight of his past pressing down like a storm. But as he watched them disappear inside, he made himself a silent promise. He wasn't going to walk away this time. The following weeks became an unbearable test of patience for Alexander. He had never been the kind of man to wait for anything, but now every passing day felt like a slow punishment for the mistakes he had made. His mornings began earlier than usual, not with the usual confidence of a man preparing to dominate the business world, but with the restless energy of someone who didn't know what to do with the weight in his chest. He couldn't stop thinking about that moment in front of Emma's house, about the way she had looked at him, guarded, broken, but still burning with the same quiet strength that had drawn him to her years ago. Her words echoed in his head every night, "You don't get to walk in and fix what you destroyed." Maybe she was right, maybe he didn't deserve a second chance, but he couldn't accept the idea of disappearing again without trying. He started finding reasons to drive through that same neighborhood, telling himself it was just coincidence, though deep down he knew better. Some evenings, he would park down the street, watching from a respectful distance as Emma and Lily played in the small front yard. The sight of them laughing together filled him with both peace and torment. He wanted to approach, to kneel beside Lily and hear her stories, to offer Emma even one genuine smile without the shadow of their past standing between them. But every time he opened the car door, something inside him froze. He was terrified that his presence would hurt them more than his absence ever had. Then one morning, fate made the choice for him. He was driving by on his way to a meeting when he saw Emma standing outside her house, struggling with a broken fence post. She looked frustrated, her hair falling loosely around her face, the sun catching golden threads in it. Without thinking, he pulled over and got out of the car. "It's going to fall if you keep pressing it like that," he said quietly. She turned, startled, her expression hardening as soon as she saw him. "You shouldn't be here," she said flatly. "I know," he admitted, walking closer anyway. "But you need help." She exhaled sharply, crossing her arms. "I've been fine on my own for 4 years, Alexander. I don't need you now." He met her gaze, calm but insistent. "Maybe not. But it wouldn't hurt to let someone hold the board while you hammer the nail." She hesitated, torn between pride and exhaustion, and finally handed him the hammer. He held the post steady while she secured it, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Their hands brushed once, and it was enough to send a surge of old memories rushing back. When the work was done, she stepped back, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Thank you," she said quietly, as if the words burned to say. "You don't owe me that," he replied. "I just wanted to help." Before she could answer, the front door opened and Lily ran out, her laughter bright like sunlight breaking through clouds. She stopped when she saw him, her blue eyes lighting up. "You're the man from the hotel," she said, her voice full of innocent delight. Emma froze, but Alexander smiled softly and knelt down. "That's right," he said. "How are you, Lily?" She grinned. "I drew something. Do you want to see?" Without waiting for permission, she ran inside, leaving both adults staring at each other in uncomfortable silence. Emma looked torn, but then sighed. "You can come in. Just for a minute." Inside, the house was small but full of warmth. There were toys neatly arranged in the corner, drawings taped to the fridge, the faint scent of vanilla and coffee in the air. He looked around quietly, realizing how foreign this kind of peace felt to him. Lily came running back, clutching a piece of paper covered in colorful scribbles. "This is Mommy," she said proudly, pointing to a stick figure with blonde hair. "And this is me." Her little finger landed on a smaller figure beside the first one, with blue eyes and brown hair. Then she paused, pointing to a third figure. "And this is someone," she said with a shy smile. "Mommy says he's far away." The paper shook slightly in Alexander's hand as he took it from her. Emma's face went pale. "Lily," she began softly, "go play in your room for a bit, okay?" The girl nodded, skipping off happily, leaving them alone. The silence that followed was heavy. He looked at Emma, his voice low. "She drew me, didn't she?" She didn't answer, but the tears in her eyes were enough. He set the drawing down carefully on the table, his throat tightening. "You should have told me," he whispered. She looked up sharply. "And what was I supposed to say, Alexander? You made it clear you didn't want a family. You made it clear you didn't want me." Her voice broke on the last word, and he felt something inside him shatter. "I was scared," he said. "Scared of losing everything, of being vulnerable. I thought love would make me weak." He let out a bitter laugh. "Turns out, it made me human. And losing it destroyed me anyway." Emma stared at him, her expression softening for just a moment before she turned away. "You can't just come back and expect things to be the same," she said. "You missed years, Alexander. You missed her first steps, her first words. You don't get those back." "I know," he said quietly. "But maybe I can be here for what comes next." She didn't answer, only looked toward the hallway where Lily's laughter echoed faintly. For the first time, she didn't ask him to leave. He took that as a small, fragile beginning, a thread of hope in the wreckage of their past. When he finally walked out of the house that evening, the sky was streaked with gold, and for the first time in years, Alexander Grayson felt something dangerously close to peace. The days that followed felt like walking across thin ice for Alexander. Every step he took toward Emma and Lily had to be measured, deliberate, because he knew that one wrong move could send everything crashing down again. He started showing up in quiet, careful ways, dropping by to fix things around the house when she was struggling, bringing groceries when he noticed she was too tired to shop, leaving without expecting gratitude or warmth. He never pushed her, never demanded her attention, and somehow, that restraint spoke louder than anything else he could have done. The man who once commanded boardrooms with a single glance now stood humbly on her porch, waiting to be told whether he could stay or had to go. Sometimes she let him in, sometimes she didn't. But each time, he saw something in her eyes begin to shift, distrust softening into uncertainty, and uncertainty into something even more dangerous, the slow flicker of hope. One Saturday morning, when the world outside was quiet and silver with rain, he found himself knocking on her door again. Emma opened it wearing a loose sweater and holding a mug of coffee, her expression guarded but calm. "What are you doing here, Alexander?" she asked, though her tone lacked the sharpness it once had. He smiled faintly. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, which was a lie they both chose to accept. She rolled her eyes but stepped aside. "Lily's still asleep," she murmured. "You can wait here if you want." He entered, shaking off the rain, the air between them thick with the scent of coffee and rain-soaked earth. For a while, they didn't speak. He sat on the couch, and she stood by the window, staring out at the garden. Finally, he said quietly, "You used to love mornings like this." She turned slightly, surprised. "You remember that?" He nodded. "I remember everything." Something in his voice made her look away. She didn't want to admit it, but she still remembered too, the mornings in his apartment when she'd wake before him, curled against his chest while the city still slept. Back then, she'd believed in forever. Back then, he'd believed he didn't need anyone. Now the irony was cruel. He'd spent years building empires only to realize the one thing he truly wanted couldn't be bought or rebuilt. Their silence was broken by the sound of small footsteps. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, her hair a mess of curls, her little feet dragging a stuffed bear along the floor. When she saw Alexander, her face lit up. "You came back," she said, running to him. He caught her easily, lifting her into his arms. "Of course I did," he said softly. "I said I would, didn't I?" She nodded solemnly, resting her head on his shoulder, and for a moment, everything else in the world disappeared. Emma watched them quietly, a storm of emotions she couldn't untangle twisting inside her. Seeing her daughter so comfortable with him both warmed her and broke her heart. It was a reminder of how easily he could have been part of their lives if things had been different. They spent the morning together, making pancakes that burned on one side and eating them anyway. Alexander laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years when Lily accidentally dropped syrup on his expensive shirt. "It's ruined," he groaned playfully, and she giggled, saying, "Now it's better." Emma couldn't help but smile at the sight. There was something disarming about the way he looked when he wasn't pretending to be untouchable. The hardness in his features softened, the exhaustion around his eyes eased, and she saw traces of the man she had once loved hidden beneath the years of ambition and regret. When Lily was down for a nap, Emma and Alexander found themselves alone again. The house was quiet except for the sound of rain tapping against the windows. "She likes you," Emma said softly. "She shouldn't," he replied. "She should hate me." "She doesn't know what happened," she said. "She only knows what she sees now." He looked at her, his voice low. "And what do you see, Emma?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "I don't know," she whispered. "I'm trying to figure it out." He took a slow breath. "I know I can't erase the past. I know I hurt you. But I want to make things right, not because I feel guilty, but because I finally understand what I lost." His words carried no arrogance, no manipulation, just quiet sincerity. "You don't get to just walk back into our lives and fix everything," she said again, but her voice trembled this time, the conviction weaker than before. "I'm not asking to fix it," he said. "I'm asking to try." The sound of thunder rolled in the distance, and she turned away, staring at the rain. He stood there for a long time, waiting for her to say something, but she didn't. When he finally moved toward the door, her voice stopped him. "Alexander." He turned. She was still facing the window, her reflection pale against the glass. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said quietly. "Not yet." He nodded. "Then I'll wait until you can." And with that, he left. When the door closed, Emma leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe him, but belief came with risk, and she'd already lost too much. Still, when she looked toward the couch where Lily's stuffed bear now sat beside his forgotten coffee cup, something inside her shifted. Maybe, just maybe, people could change. Maybe love could survive the wreckage of pride and time. And outside, through the fading rain, Alexander stood by his car, his hand trembling as he reached for the door, whispering to himself, "I won't lose them again." The weeks that followed became a strange kind of rhythm between them, a quiet dance of unspoken boundaries and hesitant trust. Alexander began visiting regularly, though never without asking first. Sometimes Emma said yes, sometimes she didn't, and each answer shaped the fragile balance between them. When he came, he didn't try to impress her with money or gestures, as he might have once done. Instead, he brought simple things: groceries, a box of Lily's favorite crayons, or a book he thought she might like. He fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen and replaced the flickering light in the hallway. There was no arrogance in his actions anymore, no trace of the man who used to think he could buy his way into forgiveness. Instead, there was humility, and that, more than anything, unsettled Emma the most. She didn't know how to deal with this new version of him, the one who listened instead of demanded, who smiled instead of commanded. It was easier to hate the man he had been, but much harder to hate the one standing quietly beside her now. One afternoon, he came earlier than usual, while she was in the garden with Lily. The child was sitting cross-legged in the grass, her small hands covered in dirt as she carefully planted seeds in a row. "You're supposed to cover them gently," Emma said, watching her daughter with amusement. "If you push too hard, they won't grow." Lily nodded solemnly and whispered, "I'll be gentle, Mommy." When she looked up and saw Alexander at the gate, she beamed. "You came," she shouted, running to him with open arms. He laughed, lifting her easily. "Of course I came," he said. "Didn't I promise I'd see how the garden was going?" Emma stood up, brushing soil off her hands, her heart tightening at the sight of them together. There was an ease between father and daughter that shouldn't have existed, not after years apart, and yet it did. It was as if she had been waiting for him all along, as if some invisible thread had connected them even when he wasn't there. After helping Lily with the last of the seeds, Alexander stayed for dinner. The atmosphere was soft, domestic, almost too normal to be real. Emma cooked while he set the table, and Lily ran between them, humming some song she had learned at preschool. When they finally sat down, Alexander watched them both, feeling a strange peace settle over him, something so unfamiliar it almost hurt. He didn't remember the last time he had eaten a meal that wasn't alone or in a boardroom. The laughter in the small kitchen, the warmth of the lights, the smell of home-cooked food, it all felt like a life he had been too blind to want before. He found himself staring at Emma longer than he should have, memorizing the way her hair caught the light and how her eyes softened when she looked at Lily. For the first time, he saw what happiness could look like, and he realized he had never truly known it before. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, they ended up on the porch, each with a cup of tea. The air was cool, filled with the faint sound of crickets, and neither of them spoke for a while. Emma finally broke the silence. "You seem different," she said. He smiled faintly. "I had to be. The old me would have lost you twice." "You already did," she said quietly, not as an accusation but as a truth. He nodded. "Yes. And I live with that every day." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the exhaustion behind his eyes, not the physical kind but the kind that comes from years of pretending not to feel. "You built an empire," she said softly, "but you don't look happy." He gave a bitter smile. "What's an empire worth when you come home to nothing?" The words lingered between them like smoke. She didn't answer because she didn't need to. She could feel the sincerity in every syllable. "I don't know what you expect from me," she said finally. "Forgiveness isn't something I can give easily." He looked down, his hands tightening around his cup. "I don't expect anything. I just want the chance to be here. For her. For you, if you'll let me." There was a long silence before she said, "And if I can't?" He met her gaze steadily. "Then I'll still be here, waiting." Something in her chest shifted painfully at that. He wasn't lying, she could feel it. This wasn't the arrogant man she had once loved, the one who thought love was a distraction. This was someone who had learned the cost of losing it. She didn't know when her walls had started to crack, but they were, and the realization frightened her more than she cared to admit. She stood up abruptly, needing distance, but his voice stopped her. "Emma," he said quietly. "Do you hate me?" She turned back slowly, her face shadowed by the porch light. "No," she whispered. "I did. For a long time. But hate takes too much energy." He nodded slowly, understanding more than she said. "Then maybe that's something to start with," he said. She didn't respond, but when he left that night, she watched him walk to his car instead of turning away immediately like before. She stood there long after he was gone, the night air cool against her skin, her thoughts tangled and restless. Inside the house, Lily stirred in her sleep and murmured softly, "Daddy," her small voice full of peace. Emma froze when she heard it, her heart twisting painfully. She knew that sooner or later she would have to make a choice, either keep protecting herself or let the man who once broke her heart prove that he could mend it. And somewhere across town, Alexander sat in his car outside his apartment building, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He barely recognized himself anymore. The cold, detached businessman was gone, replaced by someone raw and human. Someone who wanted not success, but redemption. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope that maybe he could have both. Autumn came slowly that year, wrapping the city in gold and warmth, and with it came the quiet shift between Alexander and Emma that neither of them wanted to name yet. It wasn't love reborn, not yet, but it was something fragile and alive, a cautious closeness that grew with each shared moment. He had become a part of their lives in small, unspoken ways, showing up to take Lily to preschool, fixing things around the house, cooking dinner when Emma worked late. He never crossed boundaries, never pushed her to talk about the past, but she could feel the weight of his guilt in every careful gesture, every word left unsaid. Sometimes she caught him looking at her when he thought she wouldn't notice, his eyes soft with something like longing and regret intertwined, and she would look away before the memories could catch up to her. One evening, as the air turned crisp and the first leaves began to fall, Emma invited him to join them for a small community event at Lily's school. It was nothing grand, just a harvest fair with games, food, and music, but the invitation itself was a turning point. She didn't say it out loud, but it was her way of letting him in, of showing that maybe she was no longer afraid to be seen with him, no longer hiding behind what had been. When they arrived, Lily ran ahead, her laughter echoing across the field as she joined the other children. Emma and Alexander walked side by side, their steps slow, their words quiet. He offered to buy her a cup of cider, and when their fingers brushed as she took it, neither pulled away. The warmth between them wasn't just from the drink. Later, when the children put on a small play about the changing seasons, Lily stood on the makeshift stage in her paper crown, looking proud and radiant under the soft light. Alexander watched her with a tightness in his throat he couldn't disguise. Every word she spoke, every smile she gave, felt like a gift he didn't deserve. At one point, she caught his gaze from the stage and waved enthusiastically, shouting, "Daddy, look!" The word hit him like a punch to the chest, both beautiful and painful. For a moment, everything else around him disappeared. He felt Emma's eyes on him, saw the way her expression softened despite herself, and when he looked back at her, she didn't correct Lily. That silence was its own kind of acceptance. After the performance, the three of them walked home under the dim streetlights. Lily fell asleep in his arms halfway there, her head resting on his shoulder, her small hand clutching his collar. He carried her the rest of the way, moving quietly so she wouldn't wake. When they reached the house, he laid her gently on the couch and covered her with a blanket. Emma stood watching from the doorway, something unreadable in her eyes. "You're good with her," she said softly. He smiled faintly, his voice low. "She makes it easy." They stood there for a long time, neither moving, until finally she spoke again. "I used to imagine this," she said. "Us, like this. Before everything fell apart." He turned toward her slowly. "So did I. I just didn't know what it meant back then." The honesty in his tone made her chest tighten. She wanted to hate him for the years he had missed, for the nights she had spent alone when he should have been there. But standing there, watching him stroke their daughter's hair with such quiet tenderness, she couldn't. He was different now, wounded, humbled, real. And that scared her more than his cruelty ever had. Because now he had the power to hurt her again, only this time she knew how deep that wound could go. She looked away, wrapping her arms around herself. "You should go," she said quietly. "It's late." He nodded, but before leaving, he hesitated. "Emma," he said softly, "I don't know what you need from me. But whatever it is, I'll give it. Just tell me." She met his gaze for a moment that seemed to stretch forever, then said simply, "Time." He left without another word, but as she locked the door behind him, she realized that for the first time, she didn't feel anger. Instead, there was a strange calm inside her, a flicker of trust she hadn't felt in years. That night, she dreamt of him, not the man who had walked away, but the man who stayed, sitting beside her and Lily, watching the sunrise through the window. In the days that followed, Alexander threw himself into proving that his words meant something. He rearranged his work schedule so he could be there for Lily's school drop-offs and pick-ups, he joined her at weekend markets, and he learned to be patient even when Emma tried to push him away. There were still moments of tension, arguments that surfaced when old wounds reopened, but they always ended the same way, with silence, with exhaustion, and with the quiet understanding that neither wanted to lose this fragile connection again. One evening, when he came to pick Lily up, he found Emma sitting on the porch, lost in thought. She looked up as he approached, her expression softer than usual. "You're early," she said. "I know," he replied. "I wanted to see you before she came out." She raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. For a long moment, they said nothing, listening to the hum of cicadas in the background. Then she asked, almost shyly, "Do you ever wish you could start over?" He smiled sadly. "Every day." She looked at him, really looked, and something shifted again, quietly, irreversibly. That night, as he drove home, he realized he was no longer haunted by the thought of what could have been. For the first time, he was focused on what still could be. He wasn't sure if Emma would ever fully forgive him, or if Lily would one day understand why he hadn't been there at the start, but he knew this much: he would spend the rest of his life trying to earn the place they had unknowingly given him. It wasn't redemption yet, but it was a beginning, and for Alexander Grayson, that was enough. Winter arrived quietly, covering the city in a blanket of pale light and stillness, and with it came a strange peace that Alexander hadn't felt in years. He had fallen into a rhythm with Emma and Lily, one that felt natural but also dangerously fragile, as though one wrong word could send it all crashing down. He was around more often now, helping Emma decorate for the holidays, cooking with them in the evenings, and laughing in a way that didn't feel forced. The cold air outside only seemed to make the warmth inside their little home brighter, and though Emma told herself that he was only there for Lily, she could feel the thin walls she had built around her heart beginning to crumble one by one. Sometimes she caught herself looking at him when he wasn't paying attention, noticing how much he had changed, the way he listened before speaking, the way his smile no longer carried arrogance, but quiet sincerity. He had always been handsome, but now there was something deeper about him, something that came from years of regret and the courage it took to face it. One evening, after putting Lily to bed, Emma walked into the kitchen to find Alexander washing the dishes. The sight of him there, sleeves rolled up, humming softly under his breath, made her stop in the doorway. There had been a time when this would have been unthinkable, when the man in front of her was too powerful, too busy, too untouchable for something as simple as cleaning up after dinner. Now he looked like he belonged there. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "You don't have to do that," she said. He smiled without turning around. "I know. But I want to." She shook her head lightly, trying to suppress the warmth in her chest. "You've changed," she murmured. "Or maybe I just stopped pretending," he said quietly, drying the last plate before setting it aside. They moved into the living room, where the faint glow of the Christmas tree lights cast soft reflections across the walls. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore, it was filled with things that didn't need to be said. Finally, Emma broke it. "Do you ever think about the night you left?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Alexander's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't look away. "Every day," he said. "It plays in my head like a film I can't turn off. The things I said, the things I didn't say. I can't take them back, but if I could trade everything I have now to undo that moment, I would." She looked at him carefully, her hands tightening around her cup of tea. "I don't want your guilt, Alexander," she said softly. "I just want the truth." He met her gaze then, and there was no hesitation in his voice. "The truth is, I was scared. Scared of you, scared of what loving you meant. You saw through me in a way no one else did, and it terrified me. So I ran. And I've regretted it every single day since." His words hung heavy in the air, and Emma felt tears sting the corners of her eyes. She turned away quickly, pretending to fix one of the ornaments on the tree, but he saw. He took a slow step closer, his voice softer now. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed you to know. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. You can't just say things like that and expect everything to change, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. He moved another step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him behind her. I don't expect anything, he murmured. I just don't want to lie to you anymore. She closed her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest, torn between anger and something dangerously close to hope. The sound of Lily's small footsteps on the stairs broke the moment. She appeared at the edge of the room, rubbing her eyes. Mommy, she mumbled, I can't sleep. Emma quickly composed herself and went to her, kneeling down. What's wrong, sweetheart? Can you read me a story? The girl asked, yawning. Alexander knelt beside them. How about I read tonight? He offered gently. Lily's face lit up. Okay, she said, grabbing his hand. Emma hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She watched as they disappeared into the bedroom, her chest tightening at the sound of their laughter from down the hall. For a long time after, she stood in the quiet living room, staring at the flickering lights of the tree, feeling something she hadn't let herself feel in years, peace mixed with longing, love tangled with fear. When Alexander returned, he found her sitting by the window, looking out at the falling snow. He sat down across from her, the silence stretching comfortably between them. She adores you, Emma said softly. I don't deserve that, he replied. You're her father, she said simply. That's enough. He looked at her for a long moment, and something inside him broke open. I want to be more than that, he said. Not just for her, but for you too. She turned to face him, her eyes wide, full of conflicting emotions. Alexander. She began, but he stopped her gently. I know, he said. You're not ready. I understand. But I'll wait, Emma. I'll wait as long as it takes. The sincerity in his voice made it impossible to speak. She looked at him, her heart aching, realizing that he wasn't the same man who had once broken her. This was someone who had been humbled by loss, reshaped by love, someone who had learned that strength wasn't in control but in vulnerability. She didn't answer him, but when he stood to leave, she didn't stop him either. Instead, as he reached the door, she said quietly, "Drive safe." He smiled, the smallest flicker of light in his eyes, and nodded. Always. After he left, Emma stayed by the window for a long time, watching the snow pile softly against the glass. She thought about everything they had been through, everything they had lost, and wondered if it was truly possible to find each other again after so much pain. Upstairs, Lily stirred in her sleep, clutching the storybook he had read to her. And far away, in his apartment, Alexander sat in the dark, staring at the photo of them he had taken earlier that evening, Emma laughing, Lily holding a cookie half her size, and for the first time in years, he smiled without feeling empty. Spring arrived like a quiet promise, melting away the harshness of winter and replacing it with the soft scent of rain and blooming lilacs. For months, Alexander had kept his word, giving Emma the time and space she had asked for, never pushing, never demanding, simply showing up when she allowed him to. He came to see Lily often, but always respected the invisible boundary Emma had drawn. He knew that one wrong step could send everything crumbling again, so he tread carefully, learning patience in a way he never had before. His life had changed in ways he hadn't expected. He no longer chased deals or headlines, he didn't fill his days with endless meetings to drown out the silence. Instead, he learned to exist in the quiet. And for the first time, he found peace there. Emma noticed it too. The man who used to move like a storm now carried the calm of someone who had finally understood what truly mattered. One Saturday afternoon, he joined them for a picnic at the park. Lily had been asking for days, insisting that her daddy come with them to feed the ducks. The word no longer made Emma flinch. She watched them from a distance, the way Lily's tiny hand fit so perfectly in Alexander's, how he bent down to listen to her stories, how he laughed, not the polished, polite laugh of a businessman, but something unguarded and real. It made something ache deep in her chest. For so long she had convinced herself that she could raise her daughter alone, that she didn't need him. And yet seeing them together like this, she realized how wrong she had been, not because she couldn't do it, but because Lily deserved this kind of love, this sense of belonging. Alexander glanced at her from across the field and smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and she couldn't help but return it. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Lily fell asleep on the blanket between them, her head resting on her father's lap. The moment was fragile, sacred in its simplicity. For a long time, neither spoke. The air between them was heavy with words they hadn't yet said. Finally, Emma broke the silence. "You've changed so much," she said softly. "I almost don't recognize you." He looked down at the sleeping child, his fingers brushing her hair. "I didn't change," he said quietly. "I just stopped pretending to be someone I wasn't." She studied him for a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "And who are you now?" He met her gaze, the fading light reflected in his blue eyes. "A man who knows what he almost lost. And who's willing to do anything to never lose it again." Her throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes. For years she had imagined hearing those words, imagined him realizing the weight of what he had done, but she hadn't expected them to come like this, softly, without pride or anger, just truth. "You hurt me, Alexander," she said finally, the words trembling. "You broke something in me I didn't think could ever heal." He nodded slowly. "I know. And I can't undo it. But if you let me, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." She turned her gaze to the horizon, watching the last light fade. "And what if I can't forgive you?" she asked. He took a slow breath. "Then I'll still be here," he said simply. "Because whether you forgive me or not, you and Lily are the only thing that feels real to me anymore." For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind moving through the trees. Emma looked at him then, really looked, and saw the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't the man who had left her behind. He wasn't the man who had chosen ambition over love. He was someone new, someone scarred and imperfect, but finally human. Without a word, she reached across the blanket and took his hand. His breath caught, but he didn't move. They sat there in silence, their fingers intertwined, the past still between them but no longer dividing them. When Lily stirred, murmuring softly in her sleep, Emma smiled faintly. "She loves you," she said. "I love her," he replied. Then, after a pause, his voice quieter, "and I still love you." The confession hung in the air, delicate and terrifying. She didn't answer right away. Her heart pounded painfully, torn between fear and the undeniable pull she felt toward him. Finally, she said, "I don't know if I can ever love you the same way again." He smiled sadly. "I'm not asking for the same way. I just want a chance to build something better." Something inside her broke open then, not in pain, but in release. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his shoulder, her voice shaking. "You already are." When they finally returned home, Alexander carried Lily upstairs and tucked her into bed. Emma watched from the doorway, the warmth in her chest spreading like sunlight. As he turned to leave, she stopped him. "Stay," she said quietly. "Just for tonight." He hesitated, his heart racing, but nodded. They sat together on the couch afterward, not speaking, just existing in the same space, the years of distance between them slowly dissolving into something new. Outside, rain began to fall, soft and steady, the sound of it blending with the quiet rhythm of their breathing. Emma turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you think people can really change?" she asked. He looked at her, his expression steady. "I don't know," he said. "But I know I did." She smiled faintly, her hand resting against his. "Then maybe I can too." As the night deepened, the walls she had built around her heart finally gave way. She leaned against him, and for the first time in years, she felt safe. Not because he promised her perfection, but because he had finally learned what love truly meant, showing up, even when it was hard, staying even when it hurt. When the morning came, she woke to find his arms still around her, the early sunlight spilling across the room like a quiet blessing. Down the hall, Lily's laughter filled the house, bright and carefree. Emma smiled, realizing that for the first time, their story wasn't about what they had lost, it was about what they had found again. And as Alexander stood beside her, watching their daughter dance in the morning light, she understood that sometimes the most beautiful endings aren't really endings at all, but the beginning of something you never thought you'd get back.